was a cold evening in London. The wind was sharp and people hurried along the busy streets holding their coats tightly and keeping their heads down. The city lights glowed and the sound of traffic filled the air. Big Shaq had just finished attending a charity event where he had spent the evening raising awareness about homelessness and helping underprivileged families. He was tired but satisfied, knowing that his efforts had made a difference, or at least that's what he thought. As he walked toward his car, something caught his eye. On the side of the street near a closed bakery sat a young girl. She looked no older than 15 or 16. Her clothes were old and torn, and her shoes looked too big for her small feet. She had a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders, trying to keep warm, but it didn't help much against the freezing wind. People passed her by without a glance, some even stepping away as if she didn't exist. Big Shaq slowed down. Something about her made him stop. Maybe it was the sadness in her eyes or the way she tried to smile even though she was clearly suffering. She wasn't shouting for help or begging loudly like some others did. She just sat there quietly, her hands trembling as she held a small cardboard sign that read, "Hungry and alone. Please help." Shaq walked closer, unsure what to say at first. He wasn't the type of person who liked to show off his good deeds, but his heart told him he couldn't just walk away. "Hey, little one," he said softly, kneeling down so he could see her face. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up, surprised that someone had actually spoken to her. For a moment she said nothing. Then in a weak voice she whispered, "I'm just hungry, sir. I haven't eaten since yesterday." Her eyes were glassy with tears and her lips looked dry and pale. Shaq felt something heavy in his chest. He had seen poverty before, but this felt different. This was personal and too real. He looked around. People kept walking, pretending not to notice. He wondered how many of them had seen her and decided she wasn't worth helping. "Do you want something to eat?" he asked gently. The girl nodded slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Really, you'd help me?" "Of course," he said with a small smile. "Come on. Let's get you something warm." He offered his hand, and for a moment she hesitated, as if she didn't trust anyone anymore. Then slowly she took his hand and stood up. She was lighter than he expected, fragile like a bird that hadn't eaten in days. Together they walked down the street toward a nearby cafe that was still open. Inside, the warm air greeted them instantly. The smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the room. The girl looked around shyly, clutching her blanket as if afraid someone might throw her out. But Shaq reassured her with a smile and told her to sit down. He ordered her a hot meal, soup, bread, and tea, and waited as she began to eat. At first she ate quickly, almost as if she was afraid the food would disappear. Then, when she realized no one was going to stop her, she slowed down. "Take your time," Shaq said quietly. "You're safe here." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him. "Thank you," she said softly. "No one's ever stopped to help me like this before." Shaq didn't know how to respond. He just nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and anger. Sadness for the girl's pain, and anger at how easily people could ignore someone in need. As they sat there, Shaq started wondering how she had ended up like this. She was too young to be alone on the streets. He wanted to ask, but he didn't want to scare her. So he just watched her eat, quietly observing. Her face was delicate, her hair messy, but still beautiful in a way that spoke of innocence lost too soon. Outside, the city lights kept glowing and people kept walking, busy with their own lives, unaware of the story unfolding inside that small cafe. For Shaq, it was just supposed to be another evening, another event, another drive home. But that night felt different. There was something about this girl that stirred a strange feeling deep inside him, a feeling that this encounter wasn't just random. When she finally finished her meal, she looked up at him and smiled for the first time. It was a small, shy smile, but it carried warmth and gratitude. "You're a good person," she said quietly. "People usually just walk past me. Sometimes they pretend I'm invisible." Shaq shook his head. "You're not invisible," he said firmly. "You just need someone to see you." Those words hung in the air, soft but powerful. The girl blinked back tears, and Shaq knew, in that moment, that something inside him had changed too. He had spent years using his fame to entertain people, but tonight he realized that true power didn't come from fame or fortune. It came from compassion, from taking the time to care. As they sat together in that small cafe, neither of them knew that this chance encounter would soon uncover a shocking truth. one that would connect their lives in ways neither could have imagined. But for now, it was enough that a hungry girl had found warmth, and a famous man had found purpose in a simple act of kindness. And outside, as the snow began to fall softly, London seemed just a little brighter than before. The warm air of the cafe wrapped around them like a soft blanket, a sharp contrast to the freezing night outside. The homeless girl sat quietly across from Big Shaq, her small hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Every few seconds she glanced up nervously, as if afraid someone might tell her to leave. Her eyes, tired yet filled with an innocent spark, told a story no words could capture. Shaq watched her in silence. There was something fragile about her, but also something strong. A quiet strength born from surviving too much at too young an age. After finishing her soup, she looked down at her empty bowl, then slowly back up at him. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "No one has ever helped me like this before. I didn't think anyone cared anymore." Shaq smiled gently. "Everyone deserves care," he said. "Sometimes people just forget to look." She nodded, her fingers tightening around the teacup. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the cafe, laughter, clinking dishes, music from a distant speaker filled the silence. Then suddenly her eyes filled with tears. She tried to hide them, but one rolled down her cheek anyway. Shaq leaned forward.
"Hey, what's wrong?"
he asked gently. The girl shook her head quickly. "Nothing. I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice broke halfway through. "You don't have to pretend," Shaq said. "You're safe here. You can talk to me." She hesitated, biting her lip. Then slowly the words came out, quiet at first, but filled with pain. "I wasn't always like this," she said. "I had a home once. I went to school. I had friends." Shaq listened, not interrupting. "My mom got sick a few years ago," she continued. "We couldn't pay the hospital bills. After she passed away, everything fell apart. My stepdad started drinking, and one night he told me to leave. Just like that. I didn't even get to take my things." Her voice cracked again. "I thought I could stay with friends, but after a while no one wanted me there. So I ended up here, on the streets." Shaq's heart sank. He had heard stories like this before, but hearing it from her, seeing the pain in her eyes, and made it real. "How old are you?" he asked quietly. 16, she said. "I turn 17 next month. If I make it." Those last words hit him hard. "If I make it." The kind of sentence no child should ever say. He swallowed hard. "You're going to make it," he said firmly. "I promise." The girl gave a weak smile. "You don't even know me," she said. Shaq shook his head. "I don't need to. Sometimes helping someone doesn't need a reason." For a while they sat in silence. The world outside continued to move. Cars honked, people hurried by, but inside it felt like time had stopped. Two strangers connected by one simple truth. Both had been broken by life in different ways, and both needed something real. Then, as if gathering courage, she looked at him again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Shaq replied. She hesitated. "Why did you stop for me? People see me every day. Some throw coins. Most don't even look, but you actually stopped." Shaq thought for a moment. "Because I saw you," he said. "Not just a girl sitting on the street. I saw someone who needed a chance. And I've had people give me chances when I didn't deserve them. It's only right to pass it on." The girl's eyes softened. "I used to think no one cared about people like me," she whispered. "But maybe I was wrong," Shaq smiled. "You're not invisible, remember?" Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile. For the first time he could see what she might have looked like before life took its toll. Bright, hopeful, full of dreams. After a few minutes, she looked out the window and said quietly, "I don't even remember what home feels like anymore. It's strange how you can forget something that once meant everything." Shaq followed her gaze. Snow had started falling again, small flakes floating down under the streetlights. The city looked peaceful, almost magical. "Home isn't always a place," he said after a moment. "Sometimes it's people who make you feel like you belong." She looked back at him, her eyes glistening. "Then for tonight," she said softly, "this feels like home." Shaq felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded and smiled. But inside he made a silent decision. This wouldn't be the last time she ate a warm meal. As the cafe began to close, Shaq asked if she had somewhere safe to sleep. She hesitated again before answering. "There's a bus stop near the river," she said quietly. It's not safe, but it's better than the alleys. Shaq frowned. You shouldn't be out there alone. Let me call someone, maybe a shelter, yeah? She shook her head quickly. I tried. They're full. They said to come back next week. Shaq sighed, frustrated. He looked at her again. This small, shivering girl with a brave heart and nowhere to go. And at that moment he knew he couldn't just walk away. Okay, he said finally. Then you're not sleeping outside tonight? I'll find you a place even if I have to drive you there myself. Her eyes widened in shock. You'd really do that? I don't say things I don't mean, Shaq said with a smile. And as they left the cafe together, stepping into the cold night, the girl glanced up at him once more and whispered, Thank you. You might have just saved my life. Shaq didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because deep down he felt it too, that this wasn't just a meeting of chance. It was the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. The night was cold but strangely calm. Big Shaq and the girl walked side by side down the quiet London street. Street lights flickered above them, and their shadows stretched across the wet pavement. She walked with her head low, clutching the thin blanket around her shoulders. Shaq kept a careful distance, close enough to protect her but gentle enough not to scare her. They found a small 24-hour diner near the station, one of those places that never seemed to close. The warm glow from the windows spilled onto the sidewalk and the smell of coffee filled the air. Inside, a few late-night workers sat eating quietly, their faces tired but peaceful. Shaq guided her to a booth near the back where it was quiet. He smiled. Here, sit down. You look like you could use another hot drink. She nodded shyly, her fingers still trembling a little. I don't want to be a bother, she said softly. You're not a bother, Shaq said kindly. You're a person. You deserve to be treated like one. Her eyes softened at his words. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her that way. Once the waitress came and left with their order, Shaq leaned back in his seat and asked gently, What's your name? The girl hesitated. It's Lila, she said quietly. Lila Grace. That's a beautiful name, Shaq said with a smile. You know it suits you. Lila looked down, almost blushing. People don't usually say that. Most just call me names I don't want to repeat. Shaq's heart tightened. You've been through a lot, haven't you? Lila took a deep breath. Yeah, more than I like to remember. She stared at the window for a moment, watching the snow fall. Her reflection looked ghostly in the glass, tired eyes, tangled hair, and the faint trace of who she once was. Then she began to speak, and Shaq listened. I used to live with my mom and my little brother, she said softly. We didn't have much, but we were happy. Mom worked in a small cafe. She used to bring me leftover muffins after her shift. A faint smile crossed her face, then faded. But then she got sick, really sick. We couldn't afford her medicine anymore. I tried to help, but I was just a kid. Her voice trembled. When she died, everything changed. My stepdad blamed me. He said if I'd been smarter, I could have saved her. One night he came home drunk and told me to get out. I left with just this blanket. She pulled it tighter around herself as if protecting the only thing left of her old life. Shaq listened quietly. His heart ached for her. What about your brother? He asked gently. She looked away. I don't know, she whispered. They sent him to foster care. I tried to find him, but no one would tell me where he went. I've been alone ever since. Shaq stared at her, unable to speak for a moment. The world had been cruel to her. Far too cruel for someone so young. You're strong, he said finally. Stronger than most people I know. Lila shook her head. I don't feel strong, she said. Most days I just try to make it to the next one. Sometimes I wonder why I even bother. Shaq leaned forward. You bother because your life matters, he said firmly. You've survived things that would break most people. That's not weakness, that's courage. Lila blinked as if his words were something she hadn't heard in years, something she didn't even know she needed. No one's ever said that to me, she whispered. Well, Shaq said with a soft smile. Then it's about time someone did. For a moment, they both laughed quietly, breaking the heaviness that hung between them. Lila's laughter was soft and sweet, like a sound she had forgotten she was capable of making. Then the conversation grew quieter again. Shaq asked her small things, what she liked, what she dreamed of. She told him she loved drawing. I used to sketch everything, she said. People, animals, even the clouds. It made me feel free. But I lost my sketchbook when I had to leave home. Shaq nodded. Maybe you'll draw again one day, he said. You've still got those hands and that talent. Lila smiled weakly. Maybe, but I'd need paper first. Shaq chuckled softly. Paper's easy. You've already got the hard part, heart. Something about his words hit her deeply. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a homeless girl, not as a lost soul, but as a person with dreams and worth. As the night went on, their conversation flowed naturally, like they had known each other for years. Lila began to open up more, her voice steady now, her spirit shining through the cracks. Shaq told her stories too, about his childhood, about the times he struggled before fame, about moments when he almost gave up. By the time the clock struck midnight, the diner was nearly empty. Snow fell thicker outside, coating the streets in white. Lila looked at Shaq and said quietly, "You're different, you know." "You actually listen," Shaq smiled. "That's what friends do, right?" She blinked. "Friends?" "Yeah," he said simply. "That's what we are now." Lila didn't know what to say. For years she had believed friendship was something that belonged to her past. But now, sitting across from this man who had no reason to care yet did anyway, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the cafe heater. And deep down, Shaq felt something too. A strange connection. A sense that their meeting wasn't an accident. Something about her story tugged at a buried memory, one he couldn't quite place, he didn't know it yet. But the truth about who Lila really was and what connected them was about to change everything. The night outside had grown silent. Snowflakes drifted softly past the window as the world around them slowed to a whisper. Inside the small diner, Big Shaq and Lila sat across from each other, still talking long after their cups of tea had gone cold. Shaq leaned on his elbow, listening closely as Lila shared tiny memories, pieces of her past that still clung to her like ghosts. Every word she spoke painted a picture, her mother's warm laugh, her brother's silly jokes, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings before everything changed. But something about her story stirred something inside him. A strange, uneasy feeling he couldn't explain. "Wait," Shaq said quietly, his brow furrowing. "You said your mom's name was—" "What again?" "Grace," Lila answered. Her name was Maria Grace. Shaq froze. That name, it echoed in his mind like a faint bell ringing from the past. Maria Grace. He had heard it before years ago. Back when he was a kid, there was a neighbor who lived a few houses down. She had a daughter named Lila, and a little boy. They were good people, kind, but one night their home caught fire. Everyone in the neighborhood talked about it for weeks. Shaq remembered it clearly, the sirens, the smoke, the fear. He had been told the family didn't make it. He stared at Lila now, his heart pounding. Could it be her? He looked down at her wrist where a thin bracelet glimmered faintly under the light. It looked old, handmade, with tiny silver letters spelling LG, Lila Grace. Shaq's breath caught. No way, he thought. It can't be Lila, he said slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. That bracelet, where did you get it? She looked down at it, touching it gently. Oh, this? She said softly. My mom gave it to me when I was little. It's the only thing I have left from her. I never take it off. Shaq felt chills run down his spine. His mind raced through memories. The fire, the rescue teams, the night he stood outside watching smoke rise into the sky. He remembered helping a little girl escape through a broken fence. He had been just a teenager then, terrified but determined. The girl was coughing, crying, but she had that same bracelet on her wrist. He never saw her again after that night. His voice trembled. Do you remember a fire? Lila looked up suddenly, her eyes wide. Yes, she said softly. How do you know about that? Shaq swallowed hard. Because I was there. Lila blinked in confusion. What do you mean? I lived in the same neighborhood, he said. I was one of the kids who tried to help that night. I remember there was a little girl trapped near the fence. She had that same bracelet. Her hand shot to her wrist as if protecting it. That was me, she whispered. I thought, everyone forgot. Shaq shook his head, still processing what he was saying. I never forgot, I thought you didn't make it. For a moment, the world around them seemed to stop. The hum of the diner faded away. All that remained was silence. and the sound of two lives reconnecting after years of separation. Lila's eyes filled with tears. "You're the boy who helped me?" Shaq nodded slowly. "I didn't know who you were back then. You were just this scared little kid covered in soot, but you were brave. You held onto the fence and wouldn't let go." Her lips trembled. "I remember that night. I remember someone shouting, telling me to crawl through the gap. I couldn't see your face through the smoke." Shaq smiled sadly. "It was me. I never forgot your voice, and now, here you are." Lila covered her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. "All these years, I thought everyone from that night was gone. I lost my mom in that fire. My brother was taken away, and I was sent to live with my stepdad. I didn't think I'd ever see anyone from my old life again." Shaq's heart ached. He reached across the table and gently held her trembling hand. "You made it, Lila. You survived. That's something your mom would be proud of." She broke down then, not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that someone from her past still remembered her. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "I thought God forgot me." Shaq shook his head softly. "He didn't forget you. He sent me to find you again." The snow outside thickened, swirling under the streetlights like white feathers. Inside, time stood still. Two people, once strangers, now bound by fate, sat across from each other, the weight of years lifting off their shoulders. After a long silence, Lila looked up at him through her tears. "You really remember me?" Shaq nodded. "Every bit. You were wearing a blue dress that night. Your mom kept calling your name." She gasped softly. "You're right. You really were there," he smiled faintly. "Guess life has a funny way of bringing people back together." For a while they just sat there. No words, no noise. Just a quiet understanding between them. What had begun as an act of kindness had turned into something extraordinary. Shaq looked at her, his eyes full of compassion. "You're not alone anymore, Lila," he said. "Not now. Not ever again." Lila took a shaky breath, her voice soft but strong. "I believe you." And for the first time in years, she truly meant it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, pure, silent, and endless, as if the universe itself was writing a new chapter in their story. Lila sat there in silence, her hand still trembling slightly as she tried to process what Big Shaq had just said. The soft glow from the diner's lights reflected in her teary eyes, and for the first time in years, her face showed something she had long forgotten how to feel. Hope. Shaq leaned back slowly, still shaking himself. He couldn't believe what had just happened. What were the odds? Out of all the people in the city, he had somehow found her again. The same little girl he had helped all those years ago. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy with emotion, but it wasn't awkward. It was sacred, like the silence that follows a miracle. Lila finally took a deep breath and whispered, "All these years, I thought that night was just a bad dream. But now that you're here, it feels real again." Shaq nodded, his voice low and gentle. "It was real. I remember every moment. I remember running through the smoke, shouting for help. I remember your mom's voice too. She kept yelling your name. You were so small, but you didn't give up." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "She didn't make it, did she?" Shaq hesitated, his heart heavy. "No," he said softly. "I'm sorry, Lila." She looked down, her shoulders shaking. For years she had carried that pain alone, pretending to be strong. But now, with someone who actually remembered, someone who was there, the walls she had built inside her began to crumble. Tears fell freely as she whispered, "I used to dream that she'd come back. Every night I'd close my eyes and pretend I could still hear her singing. That was the only way I could fall asleep." Shaq's eyes glistened too. "She loved you, Lila. I could see it in her eyes that night. Even in those last moments, she was trying to save you." Lila nodded slowly, clutching her bracelet, the only thing she had left of her mother. "She told me to run. I didn't want to leave her, but she screamed at me to go. I thought I'd never forgive myself for that." Shaq leaned forward and placed his hand gently over hers. "You didn't leave her, Lila. You carried her with you. Every time you survived another day, every time you chose to keep going, that was her strength living in you." Those words broke something open inside her. She covered her face and began to sob. Not quietly, but deeply, painfully, like she was releasing years of sorrow that had been buried too long. Shaq didn't try to stop her. He just sat there letting her cry, letting her heart finally breathe again. After a few minutes, she looked up, her eyes red but peaceful. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You've already saved my life twice, once as a kid and now again." Shaq smiled softly. "You don't have to thank me. Maybe this was meant to happen. Maybe God wanted me to find you again." Lila took a deep breath and smiled through her tears. "It's strange. For so long I thought nobody even remembered I existed. I was just another face on the street, but now it feels like I matter again." "You've always mattered," Shaq said firmly. "You just needed someone to remind you." A long silence followed. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the street still and quiet. Lila looked out the window, lost in thought, while Shaq watched her, no longer as a stranger, but as someone he felt deeply connected to. Finally, he said, "Lila, I don't want you to go back out there tonight. You've been through enough. Let me help you, properly this time." She looked at him, her eyes uncertain. "Help me how?" "I'll find you a safe place," he said. "There are people I know, good people, who can help you get back on your feet. A shelter, counseling, maybe even help finding your brother." Her eyes widened. "My brother?" Shaq nodded. "We can try to look for him. I have contacts who can search records, old foster placements, social services. You shouldn't have to do that alone." Lila's lip trembled. "I've dreamed of seeing him again for so long," she said. "I just didn't think it was possible." Shaq smiled gently. "It's possible now. We'll find him." Lila's voice cracked as she whispered, "You really mean that?" "I never say things I don't mean," Shaq replied, repeating the same promise he had made earlier. Something warm spread through Lila's heart. For the first time in years, she believed in someone. And maybe, just maybe, she believed in herself too. Without thinking, she reached across the table and hugged him tightly. Shaq was surprised at first, but then he wrapped his arms around her, holding her like the little sister he never had. She trembled in his arms, crying softly, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore, they were tears of healing. When she finally pulled away, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you for finding me." Shaq smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You found me too," he said quietly. "You reminded me why I do what I do." The diner lights dimmed slightly as the clock struck 1 in the morning. Outside, the world was peaceful again, as if the city itself was giving them a moment to just exist. Lila leaned back, a small but genuine smile forming on her face. "You know," she said, "for the first time in a long while, I'm not scared anymore." Shaq nodded. "That's because you're not alone anymore." And in that quiet moment, as the snow-covered streets glistened under the faint city lights, something powerful happened. A reunion of two souls who had once crossed paths in tragedy, now meeting again in hope. Fate had brought them back together, but it was compassion that would keep them there. The night had grown even quieter by the time they left the diner. The city, blanketed in white snow, looked peaceful, as if the world had paused for a moment to watch something good finally happen. Lila walked beside Big Shaq, holding her old blanket close, but for the first time her steps didn't feel heavy. There was a lightness inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Shaq looked around, thinking of what to do next. He knew he couldn't just drop her back on the street. "There's a shelter not too far from here," he said gently. "They help young people like you, and I know the manager there. They'll take care of you." Lila looked up at him uncertainly. "You really don't have to do all this," she said softly. "You've done enough already," Shaq smiled. "Lila, kindness doesn't have a limit. When I help someone, I don't do it halfway." She tried to smile, but her eyes filled with tears again. "It's just, I'm not used to people caring. Every time someone said they'd help, they disappeared. I guess I stopped believing in promises." Shaq stopped walking and turned to face her. The streetlight above cast a soft glow on the snow-covered pavement. "Then let this be the promise that doesn't break," he said. "You're not alone anymore. I mean that." For a moment, she just stood there staring at him. A man she barely knew, yet who had already done more for her than anyone in years. Then, without a word, she nodded and followed. They reached the shelter after a short drive. It was a small building tucked between two larger ones, with warm lights glowing through its windows. A sign above the door read, "The Haven." Shaq had visited it before, donating clothes and food, but tonight felt different. Tonight he wasn't just helping strangers, he was bringing someone home. Inside, the air smelled faintly of soup and soap. A woman in her 40s, wearing a kind smile and a thick sweater, greeted them at the desk. "Shaq," she said warmly. "What brings you here this late?" Shaq smiled back. "Hey, Mary. I've got someone who needs a safe place tonight." Mary looked at Lila, her expression softening immediately. "Of course," she said kindly. "Come in, love. You're safe here." Lila hesitated at the doorway. She looked around. The soft light, the cozy beds, the laughter of a few other girls sitting by the heater. It didn't feel like a shelter. It felt like warmth, like belonging. She turned to Shaq. "Are you sure they'll let me stay?" Shaq chuckled. "You think I'd bring you here if I wasn't sure? Go on. You'll be okay." Mary led Lila to a small room with a bed, a blanket, and a heater humming quietly in the corner. It wasn't much, but to Lila it felt like paradise. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the clean sheets, unable to believe they were really for her. Shaq stood at the doorway watching her. "You'll sleep safe tonight," he said softly. "No cold streets. No fear." She looked up at him, her voice small. "Why are you doing this for me?" Shaq smiled faintly. "Because once someone did it for me," he said. "When I was younger, I was lost too. Someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Now it's my turn." Lila's eyes shimmered. "You really think I can change my life?" "I don't think," he said. "I know you can." For a moment, she just looked at him, her heart full of gratitude she couldn't put into words. Then she whispered, "Thank you. For everything." Shaq nodded, his voice gentle. "Rest tonight, Lila. Tomorrow's a new beginning." He turned to leave, but before he could walk out, she said softly, "Shaq, wait." He looked back. "I used to pray every night for someone to see me, not to save me, just to see me. And tonight, you did." Shaq's eyes softened. He walked back to her and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "The world sees you now, Lila. Don't ever forget that." She smiled through her tears, clutching her blanket. "Good night, Shaq." "Good night, Lila," he said. "You're safe now." As he walked out of the shelter, the night air felt colder, but inside, his heart was warm. He looked up at the falling snow, thinking about how life had a strange way of bringing people together when they needed each other most. In that moment, he realized something. This wasn't just about helping one girl. It was about reminding himself that fame, success, and applause meant nothing if they didn't make the world a little better. Meanwhile, inside her small room, Lila lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't used to soft pillows or warmth. It felt unreal. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about where she'd sleep, or if someone might steal her things. For the first time, she felt safe. She whispered into the dark, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for sending him." Then, with a soft sigh, she closed her eyes and drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in years. Outside, the snow kept falling soft and endless, covering the city in white. A quiet reminder that even in the coldest nights, kindness can light a fire that never dies. The morning light crept softly through the small window of the shelter. It touched Lila's face, warm and gentle, a feeling she had almost forgotten. For a moment, she didn't move. She lay there, listening to the quiet hum of the heater and the distant chatter of other girls waking up. Then it hit her. She wasn't on the street anymore. She had a bed, a roof, and safety. For the first time in years, she had woken up not to the sound of footsteps or car horns, but to peace. Lila sat up slowly, blinking against the morning sun. On the small table beside her bed was a folded note. The handwriting was messy but familiar. It said, "Morning, Lila. I'll stop by later today. Don't disappear on me. We've got a lot to do." "Shaq." She smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. She pressed the note to her chest like it was something precious. After a warm shower and breakfast, things that had once seemed like luxury, Lila joined the others in the main hall. A few girls were talking, some knitting, others writing in notebooks. They welcomed her kindly, and for the first time she didn't feel like an outsider. Later that afternoon, Big Shaq arrived, carrying a small paper bag. Lila spotted him from across the room and rushed over, her face lighting up. "You came back," she said, half surprised. Shaq grinned. "Didn't I say I would?" He handed her the bag. Inside was a brand new sketchbook and a pack of pencils. "You said you liked to draw," he said. "So I figured it's time you started again." Lila stared at the gift in disbelief. Her hands trembled as she touched the cover of the sketchbook. "I haven't had one of these since I was a kid," she whispered. "I don't even know what to draw anymore." Shaq smiled softly. "Then draw your story. Draw where you've been and where you're going." Something in his words stirred inside her, a spark of creativity she thought she had lost forever. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'll try." Over the next few weeks, everything began to change. Lila started attending counseling sessions at the shelter. At first, she was shy, speaking only in short sentences, but gradually her words grew stronger. She joined art workshops and helped serve food to other people who came in from the cold. The staff quickly noticed her kindness, how she always made sure others ate before her, how she smiled at everyone who walked through the door. She began to draw every day. Her sketchbook filled with scenes from her past, her mother's smile, her brother's laugh, the fire, the streets, the night she met Shaq. But as the pages turned, the drawings changed. The dark lines grew softer, the faces happier, the skies brighter. Each page told a story of healing. Shaq visited often, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just sitting and talking. He never treated her like a project or a charity case. He treated her like family. One day, he found her outside, sitting on the steps of the shelter, sketching the sunrise. "You're really good," he said, peering over her shoulder. She smiled. "I'm getting there. Drawing helps me breathe again." He nodded. "Maybe one day you'll show your art to the world." She laughed softly. Maybe one day. Weeks turned into months. Lila started volunteering full-time at the Haven, helping new arrivals settle in, guiding them, comforting them, showing them that kindness still existed. She had gone from the girl who needed saving to the girl who helped others find hope. But she didn't forget her goal: to find her brother. With Shaq's help, they contacted social services, old foster records, and local organizations. It wasn't easy. Names had changed, files were missing, but Lila refused to give up. "If I survived all that," she told Shaq, "I can survive this search too." Shaq admired her strength. Every time he saw her smile, he felt proud. Not of what he had done, but of what she had become. She was no longer the frightened girl from that snowy night. She was strong, confident, and full of light. One afternoon, Mary, the shelter manager, called them into her office. She held a paper in her hand, her eyes shining. "Lila," she said, smiling, "we found him." "Your brother?" Lila froze. The world seemed to stop spinning. "What?" she whispered. Mary nodded. "He's in a foster family a few towns away. He's 16 now. He's safe." Tears filled Lila's eyes as she covered her mouth, her voice breaking. "He's alive?" Shaq placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes full of pride. "See, I told you it was possible." Lila turned to him, crying and laughing at the same time. "You kept your promise," he smiled. "And I always will." That night, as the stars sparkled over the quiet city, Lila sat by the window with her sketchbook. She opened to a new page and began to draw, two figures holding hands under falling snow. Above them, she wrote in neat, careful letters, "The night my life began again." For Lila, it wasn't just a reunion that changed her story. It was the kindness that gave her back her voice, her hope and her heart, and somewhere deep down, Big Shaq knew that helping her had changed his life too. Because sometimes, saving someone else becomes the moment you save yourself.